All right, let me bring on James Corbett. I burned up a bunch of his time, and we still have a couple minutes left. Welcome back to the program, James. Great to have you back on.
Well, it's great to be back on. Thank you for inviting me tonight.
You're very welcome, sir. And how are you?
Well, all things considered, I'm pretty well, but the state of the world, unfortunately, has not improved a whole lot since the last time we talked. And sitting here in Japan, of course, we just clicked by the second anniversary of Fukushima, and we are, if anything, I think the canary in the coal mine on the economic matters that you're talking about there, with the changeover in the Bank of Japan governorship that just took place here, the new Abe administration that's looking to inflate away the yen into nothing. So I think the yen is probably going to be at the forefront of that collapse. So you guys, I guess, will have front row seats to see what happens here to find out what's going on, and I'll be right in the thick of things.
You will definitely be in the thickest. First of all, how close are you to the Fukushima area? What is it, prefecture? That's what they call it?
Right, there's Fukushima City as well as Fukushima Prefecture. We're about 400 miles southwest of Fukushima here, so quite a distance from that. Tokyo got a lot of the fallout directly as it was occurring in the week or so after 3/11, when there was a few plumes that went directly over Tokyo. But out in this part, it's been mostly in terms of not so much in terms of fallout, but the big concern is just the water, all of the radiation that continues to be leaking into the ocean and polluting the seafood, obviously. So that's something that we're concerned about all over Japan, and people, unfortunately, are going to have to increasingly be concerned about all over the Pacific.
No doubt about it. I mean, we last week we did several shows on our programs where we talked about Fukushima. In fact, we even had a few folks that were in the military at that time. We're looking for some justice from TEPCO for the exposure, amount of radiation they've been exposed to. But you talk about seafood and polluting the ocean. We had done programs before where it showed tuna off the coast of California with ridiculous amounts of radiation in them. This problem isn't going to go away. It's just going to continue to manifest and become larger and larger. All right, that's our first segment. When we come back, I want to get into it. What James has been working on. We'll talk more about his website. We're going to be back with James Corbett and more Wide Awake News Radio in just a minute. Hang tight. Guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, joined by James Corbett. His website is corbettreport.com. I'm going to put that link in the chat right now. Very informative site that you need to bookmark and make sure you visit it every single day. James, we were talking before the program a little bit about some of the things you've been working on. I definitely want to get into them. But I do just want to elaborate slightly on what you said about the canary in the coal mine economically being in Japan, because I agree with that 100%. I mean, the debt to GDP ratio, I believe, is 270 some percent right now, and it is an all-out race to the bottom with all currencies. They all want to be devaluing it as fast as possible so they can make their exports look attractive. But one thing that is waiting out there to pop. And, it's like during the Depression of the 30s that you would see a country go, a region, let's say you'd see Europe suffer economically, and that would translate into, over a period of time, spreading around the globe. But now, if James wakes up tomorrow to find out that the Japanese government is defaulting on its debt or its absolute anarchy in the streets, or whatever the cause may be of a massive crisis inside of Japan, it doesn't take a week or a month or a year for that to trickle back to the United States. It is absolutely instantaneously. If they defaulted tonight, we would wake up to that carnage here in the U.S. Tomorrow morning. These institutions that we talk about here all the time are leveraged to the hilt with an estimated, nobody knows, but an estimated quadrillion plus of derivatives that are all based on debt, and a lot of it is sovereign debts, such as the sovereign debt of Japan. So canary in the coal mine, no doubt about it, as far as watching a nation devalue its currency. But this is the interconnected world. This is the central banking world. If one goes down, we're all going down together rapidly.
Unfortunately so. We've definitely entered a system that has been constructed from behind the scenes through economic infrastructure and institutional infrastructure that has created this global web in which we are all ensconced now, whether we like it or not, because we have to use these Federal Reserve notes or yen or pesos or pounds or whatever people have in their pocket. It's legal tender, so that's really the system by which they ensnare us, no matter how much we want to be independent. If we use those types of currencies, we're kind of stuck and at the behest of these central banks that are in time after time, in country after country, one way or another, privately owned institutions that are set up by and for the very few globalists at the top who want to puppeteer the system. And just as a perfect case of that, we have what's happening in Japan right now with the changeover in the governorship of the Bank of Japan from the Masaaki Shirakawa to Haruhiko Kuroda, who was the president of the Asian Development Bank. He's coming in, being appointed by Abe, the new prime minister here in Japan, specifically to get inflation going, i.e. to inflate away the money supply. So the Japan is moving into a new quantitative easing era. They've flirted with this, and they've been doing this to a certain extent off and on over the past 2.5 decades now of the Japanese stagflation crisis. Mm-hmm. But they haven't been able to get inflation going again. It's been a deflationary crisis here in Japan for a long time. So they're going to try basically turning on the printing presses, and they're going to start injecting yen directly into the economy. They're starting an asset purchasing program here. So. This is going to be a big changeover, and whatever nominal independence the Bank of Japan has had since, I believe, 1994, when it was formally decoupled from the government, it's just a illusory thing anyway. And since Kuroda is coming in as the Bank of Japan governor, I think it's just going to be completely the Abe agenda, and he was elected on the promise of inflating the yen and increasing the money supply. So it is a currency war. It is happening right now. The G7, the G8, the G20, whatever institution they want to issue these statements can come out and say, oh, it's not a currency war. We're only doing things to affect our local domestic policy. But we all know that's a lie. It does affect the world. And what's happening here in Japan is affecting the U.S. markets. It is affecting the European markets and vice versa. So what we're seeing is the first round in this currency war. And as I say, I think it's only going to heat up from here.
I agree 100%. And it my question, I could spend probably the entire program talking to you about what you see happening in Japan. Do you see, like you have in Canada, where you let me know a bit ago you were originally from, in Canada there's a very big population that I believe is awake, right? They're looking for independent media. They're trying to see the forest through the trees, if you will, just like we have in the United States, a burgeoning population of people who are waking up. Is there that kind of a movement beneath the so-called mainstream in Japan that sees the track that they're on and is calling for a currency that is by and for the people of Japan, or less of a central banking control?
There's even a Tokyo Tea Party. There are different institutions, there's different groups, there's different ideas, there's alternative media here, just like in the States or in Canada or other places. But it's always a question of how it negotiates with the culture at large, and Japan has been under such imperial conditioning for so long that there's a lot of people who just aren't ready or willing to question the system they've been placed in. Just like in the U.S. and everywhere else, there's a lot of people who are under the spell of the globalists. So it's something we have to continue working towards to educate people about.
Well, unfortunately, most people are going to wake up, one way or another, but unfortunately, most of them are going to wake up on the backside of something catastrophic. So, all right, there is connection between these governments that James and I are talking about and what's happening in South America. And I'll draw that connection, and we'll jump into that topic when we come back. Stay tuned. We're going to be back with James Corbett, more Wide Awake News Radio. Hang tight. Welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath joined by James Corbett. His website, CorbettReport.com. Again, if you're not visiting that every day, you need to be. Great information. Always very, very good interviews and topics that James is covering over there. We were talking a little bit before in that last segment, James, about central banks controlling currency, race to the bottom, and how interconnected, as you said, web. As Ellen Brown says, web of debt. How connected the West and Japan and some other Asian countries, most Asian countries, are through the central banking cabal. But there are some nations that aren't, and there are some nations that, or at least trying not to participate in our banking system and try to participate in the globalist banking system. And it seems that when these nations do step out of line, I guess, or when they're belligerent children, maybe, that they face the heavy force of so-called democracy. And you
absolutely right. No, it's a good point, and one that's often made about, for example, Iran being on this axis of evil. And why is that? I mean, fundamentally, it's because they won't buckle down to the system, the New World Order system that the West and NATO and the U.S. and their allies want to push through. And it has to do with such things as, for example, Iran trying to go around the U.S. dollar with their oil programs. For example, they were doing gas for gold with Turkey until the U.S. came in with extra sanctions to make sure to stifle that trade. So there's a lot of that aspect to it. But I don't want to get put into the position of being on the side of my enemy's enemy just because they're my enemy's enemy. And I think there can be that type of corralling of people into, well, then we should support Iran, we should support North Korea, we should support these regimes that are clearly being targeted and being made into boogeymen, and there's a lot behind that. But I don't think that, for me, the answer is going to be to build up a different national central banking system. To me, the idea is what can be done by individuals at the local level taking things into their own hands, their own economic productivity and their own economic livelihoods. So for me, the idea of complementary currencies and looking for other ways of structuring a local economy that you can be directly participatory in and that directly is fundamentally greasing the transactions between you and the local community, that's what I'm most interested in when we start talking about solutions to this crisis, rather than looking for some other overarching system of control that we hope can be kept in the hands of the right people.
No, I can see your point there, and I think it's a great one. I want to get into complementary currencies or complementary or even new economic models, local, regional. I think talking about Iran, North Korea, these other nations, a lot of the BRIC nations that are acting badly. I do like to talk about these and show the activity that's happening covertly in our name. We don't even know it, but in a lot of cases we're told because it's of reasons like Iran. They're horrible to their people and they're trying to get nuclear weapons. Well, we're not being told the truth let me rephrase that. That may very well be true, but the reasons being sold to the people of this world are something completely different. And I believe if we can show people that if we're going to war over weapons of mass destruction, and there isn't any, or we're going to war to spread democracy in these terrorist rogue states such as Libya, but then point out, look, this was the same guy who was our partner in the war on terror up until he decided he was going to do something different than the U.S. dollar. I still think that's a very powerful and effective way to try to show somebody that everything that is being presented to us isn't necessarily, and in most cases, the truth. And to understand the truth, or to understand what's really going on, isn't in a way to affect some kind of change that might lead to a different form of currency or local currency. I have a question for you, though, on that topic, and I'm glad you brought it up. I do believe in a barter system. I do believe in gold and silver as being a legitimate legal currency. And every time I talk about this with somebody, I always have the same question, which is, how do you get around the control of central banks that want anything and everything but people taking their own financial destiny in their hands? I mean, we've seen people here in the States that have lost millions of dollars worth of precious metal because they decided that they were going to stamp something on it that was even remotely close to something that said dollar or looked like a silver coin minted by the government, and bam, they're shut down as counterfeiting. Give me some examples, I guess, of counter currency or maybe programs that you'd like to see implemented in a local or regional way to take back our economies.
Right. Well, it's important to understand that there already are a lot of local alternative currencies that are functioning. So I hope people in their own areas are going to look into what's already operating in their own local community to see if they can join into that, or to create something else if you don't find the alternative that you like. And again, I don't think that the idea of getting around the problem of one centralized currency is to create another centralized currency. I think there has to be a lot of different competing ideas. And of course, in a free market of goods, we would also have a free market of currencies that would equally be competing for space on that economic playing field. And it wouldn't necessarily have to be that one of those currencies would come out on top. Why couldn't we use different currencies for different transactions in different situations?
Sure,
and that would be inherently a more stable system, right? Because
absolutely. You'd be forced to manage that in a more judicious way. You wouldn't be taking chances with your currency. Go ahead.
Well, that's true, and also the fact that if the dollar collapses, everyone in America is going to be in chaos and panic mode overnight. But if a single local currency collapses, one would assume there would be other things that would be already existing that would at least help you get through a transitionary phase. So I think that there's just inherent stability that comes with sort of decentralizing and getting onto multiple different things. But as I say, there are lots of things that are already in place. And of course, there's the idea of the local exchange trading system, the LET system, which is already operating in a lot of different communities. There's community dollars in different communities all across the United States that work by basically being equivalent to a dollar, but being only exchangeable in the local area for local community businesses. Mm-hmm. And it's the type of thing where, again, it's not the solution to everything, but I think it's something that if people are starting to get involved in that and invested in that and buying more of their goods through that system now before this collapse that we know is mathematically certain to happen soon, if people start building that up now before the collapse happens, it can be the system that will help see them through that collapse. And we've already seen that, for example, in the Eurozone with the Volos system in Greece. It's the TEM system is exactly this type of LETS system that is a barter exchange currency that they've set up because of the euros drying up in Greece, but people still want to trade with each other. How do you facilitate that? You start an exchange trading system, and literally this is what's saving a lot of people in Greece from starvation. So it is something that's already being used, and people instinctively know it. When the collapse happens, they know they need some system like that. My point is we should be trying to build that up in places before the collapse happens, because it will save a lot of people a lot of headache down the road.
No doubt. And do you know if in Greece, I mean, that all sprang from the sovereign debt crisis of Greece and the rest of Europe. I mean, none of this was in place prior, right? I mean, it took I believe a couple of years for this this kind of exchange and almost barter type system to come to light.
That's right. I don't know exactly when it started, but it was certainly, I think, after the Euro crisis began to unfold. And I think obviously that there's some birth pangs and things that it has to go through during that process that, again, if you can get that out of the way before the collapse happens, you are necessarily going to be in a better position for it.
Yeah, and that would have been my point, which is, if they'd have been talking about this and having this in place before, it would have made a lot of the suffering, and let's be real, there's a lot of suffering happening in Greece and throughout Southern Europe right now. We're going to be back with James Corbett and more Wide Awake News Radio in just a minute. Hang tight. Guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio, final segment of this March the 11th, Monday edition with James Corbett. And a question came into chat. Gary let us know during the break about listening to James talk about alternative currencies or alternative solutions to a financial crisis that could and will impact us all. And somebody wanted James to talk about Bitcoin. I get this quite a bit, James. Why don't you give me your take on the whole Bitcoin situation?
Well, I get it a lot too, both from the pros and the cons, and there are people who are strongly for it, strongly against it. I would have to say that I'm neither. But again, I come from the perspective of someone who is not looking for one system that is going to be the answer to everything. And if that's what people are looking for, I don't think Bitcoin is going to be it. But for people who don't know, basically this is an electronic currency that is It's not backed up by anything, obviously, but it is limited, at least in terms of its creation. It requires a complex computer process algorithm to calculation in order to mine new coins, and that becomes more and more difficult as time goes on. So it is actually limited in terms of how many will ever be produced, and that gives it a sort of value or stability that, for example, you don't get with the fiat funny money Federal Reserve notes. And because of that, more people are getting interested in this, and it is starting to prove itself useful in a lot of transactions online. And it is at least theoretically anonymous or anonymizable, or as anonymizable as anything online could ever be, if you are using Tor routers, etc., and blah, 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 and take all the precautions, you theoretically can be anonymous while using Bitcoin. Although I tend to side with John Young of Cryptome on this one, who says that basically online anonymity is a pipe dream. But regardless of that debate, at least you can be more anonymous than with a lot of other currencies. So it's an interesting idea. I'm not 100% behind it because, again, it relies on certain things like the fundamental infrastructure of the internet. I mean, it is an online thing, so we are relying on that to be there, and I'm not sure that always will be, certainly not in times of great crisis. So I'm not sure I would put all my eggs in that basket. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket. But as a possible means of exchange to facilitate things, for example, on the internet, that might be one of the things that people would turn to. And again, I don't think it has to be the only solution, but in the free marketplace of ideas that can happen online, I think it's a good idea. And there has been some interesting movement on that. And for example, there was a big hacking scandal a couple of years ago that took the price of Bitcoin plummeting during the wake of that scandal. But since then, it's proven itself relatively stable. So we'll see how it continues to develop. I'm not 100% pro supporter. I'm not 100% against it. I think it's just one of the tools that we can keep in our arsenal for getting around the Federal Reserve note tyranny.
I like the fact that people are talking about it, and it is an alternative to our current fiat systems. I'm with you on that. I think that the fact that somebody's noodling this and thinking about a currency that can be limited and isn't the value isn't controlled by technocrats. I do like that idea. I'm with you as far as being sold out on something that is completely traded over the internet. This ability to shut all this thing down, as we were talking about the ability in China for them to throw firewalls and that kind of thing. I'm a little hesitant about that. But as far as being an alternative, or at least the idea of something else besides fiat currency, I like it as well. One question that Ellen Brown, every time she's on, makes me think about is that we necessarily need to have the ability to expand the monetary base, and there's really nothing wrong with expanding the monetary base if it's expanding a legitimate currency. If we had a constitutional currency in the United States where it was created by government for the people, by the people for the people, and not a debt, that isn't a bad thing. So what is your take on that? I mean,
I agree completely. That's why I don't think that a gold-backed currency is necessarily a good idea, because that ties the currency to what can be dug out of the ground, which, I mean, it does limit the supply, that's true, but as Bill Still, for example, he gives the analogy, well, if I made the hairs on my head a type of currency, it would limit the supply, and it would guarantee that each hair would be very valuable, but that's not a way to run an economy. And in my case, it would be even worse idea for running an economy, because I don't have any hairs.
I'd have just a little bit more than you, I think.
Yeah. But the point is well taken. I mean, just because something is limited in supply, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good thing to back a currency. I think we have to separate out the different functions of money, because people think of money as a means of exchange and a store of wealth and a unit of value, unit of measurement, as it were. And I think all three of those things are completely different functions, and they don't have to be done by the same thing. So I think precious metals absolutely are a store of value, store of wealth, and they have been for thousands of years. They've maintained that value. So that's obviously a store of wealth, but doesn't have to be a means of exchange, and it's not necessarily feasible or practical to make the type of economy we're in right now. To think of that running on gold and silver coins or something backed up by it doesn't seem to be the best way to do that.
No.
And again, I'm for free markets and free currencies. So if people want to try that system and if it works, then great for them. I'm not against that being done. I just don't think that it's going to be the most feasible way to run the 21st century economy.
Yeah, and history has shown. You talk about hairs on your head. Well, sure, anything could be a currency. Shells and beads can be a currency if it has the backing of a government behind it. England ran on tally sticks for hundreds of years, and nothing more than pieces of wood. So it isn't. It's faith. It's faith in whatever you have as your currency. Again, something completely different of a store of wealth. And unfortunately, our currency right now is being there is no faith that we should be putting into it because it is completely engineered to pile more failure onto us, we the people. So we only have about 5 minutes left. I just look at the clock here, and I really wanted to talk about South America a little bit because you said before the program that you had been doing some recent interviews and putting stuff on your website, CorbettReport.com, on that topic. And, it's just another example of the U.S. meddling, things that are being done in our name that most people just don't know about. Why don't you give us as much as you can in about 3.5, 4 minutes of what you've been uncovering down there or witnessing?
Right. Well, I just had a fascinating conversation with Matias Rojas, who is a Chilean alternative media activist, and he's been following a story that just broke in Chile in the last few months about a drug smuggling ring that's been busted, and there's been some police insiders that have come in to blow the whistle on this, and they have uncovered evidence that this goes straight back to the CIA, DEA, which is protecting and enabling this drug smuggling ring. And the money from this is being funneled into opposition groups in Ecuador to fund the opposition against Rafael Correa, who has drawn the ire of the U.S. and their allies in recent years. Especially, Julian Assange, again, whatever you think of him, goes to the Ecuadorian government to try to get asylum, etc. So Ecuador has been a sort of thorn in the side in Latin America in terms of American dominance in the region. And now with Chavez out of the way, I think Correa is kind of the big obstacle to American hegemony in the region. And that is something that's absolutely going to be more and more of a concern playing out from here. So we basically have Iran-Contra too, except in this case it's drug smuggling to Chile through Chile that is being used to fund opposition in Ecuador, and it's basically the same old strategy that we saw back in Iran-Contra. The
more things change, the more they say exactly the same. The involvement of establishing U.S.-friendly governments inside of Central America and South America has been going on for a long time, but it seems that more and more, fewer and fewer nations, rather, have the ability to stand up and say, no, we're not going to participate. Again, not an apologist for what's going on in Venezuela or any other place in the world, but we really do need to be enlightened on these things because, again, these are acts that are happening with, James is talking about drugs and guns. These are the things that we're supposed to be terrified of and fighting, yet they can use these in order to influence policy in these regions. You also said that you were talking to somebody in Argentina as well about...
Right, I did a report on Argentina and basically the fact that they've arrived at yet another inflationary brink. They've been fighting hyperinflation and monetary collapses for decades now. It's
and going in and out of them almost.
Yeah. Exactly. In the early 1990s, their currency collapsed. They ended up with a peso that was 1/300 trillionth of where it started in the 1970s. Then there was another cycle in around 2001, 2002, huge riots, the IMF riots that took place there. Mm-hmm. Then the last 10 years, there's been this idea that there's been this recovery and Argentina, they're doing so well now. But that's basically collapsing again, and they're going into another inflationary cycle, and they're starting to put on price controls, etc., in a vain attempt to stave off the wolves. They've even been censured by the IMF now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, I suppose, right, if considering they're the main hyenas. But still, it does show that Argentina is in some pretty precarious circumstances again. So that's they're on the brink of collapse once again, and that's not a good thing. And I've also been concentrating on some of the regional agreements that has been building up in the last several years, quite quietly, I think, under the radar to a lot of people, at least in the North American context, talking about UNISUR and Mercosur and these other trade and regional, even governmental agreements. UNISUR, for example, was actually modeled to be like the European Union. And this was back in 2008 when I guess they thought the European Union was something worthy of being modeled.
To go after, yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to downplay those comparisons now, obviously, but it's still a type of regional agreement, which is a bit flabbergasting because, again, you have these people like Correa and Chavez, etc., who've been given all this lip service to being against the American system and neoliberalization and all of this, but if all they're doing is creating an alternative regional government, then we're still heading towards regional government, which I think cannot be the answer. So there's some interesting things happening in the Latin American region right now, and a lot of it quite under the radar, I think, to people in the North American context, because it's just not being covered by either the mainstream or much of the alternative media.
Yeah, when you look at South America, Central America, it's except for occasional scandal that might make it into the mainstream, it's not talked about. There's so many other things that are put before the people of this country, as I'm sure you're aware, that we're supposed to be terrified of and worried about. I wanted to ask you real quick, we're about to run out of time, the recent threats, or I was going to ask you about North Korea and your proximity, is that a big concern in Japan right now?
Not realistically. I think it's more of a concern in South Korea, but I think it is a concern. North Korea is a genuine wild card. I think it genuinely is run by madmen, so it is always a question, but it does play into everybody's concerns, and it does create at least the specter of the boogeyman that justifies more American and other military intervention in the region. So it is a convenient boogeyman for the powers that shouldn't be.
I agree, and I know some of the statements have been pretty radical lately, backing out of the 53 Accord and taking matters in North Korea's own hands, and it's all very frightening. But we got to remember this has been done over and over and over again over the last 50 years. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com. I always want to say but it's not. It's CorbettReport.com. Go to his website, bookmark it, go there, visit every day. James, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me on. Always a pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you. All right, guys, stay tuned for Jeff Rins because he is coming up next. We will see you tomorrow night. Have a good night. Peace.